My name is Brittany, and I am 27 years old. I had spent years imagining the moment. I would finally breathe without pressure crushing my ribs, the day I would choose myself without apology, and that moment arrived quietly the morning I quit my job. There was no dramatic speech, no slammed door, just a calm email and a trembling finger hovering over the send button. For years I had worked overtime, swallowed insults from clients, and lived inside a schedule that treated my life like an afterthought. I told myself it was temporary, that exhaustion was the price of stability. But stability never came, only deeper fatigue. So I walked away. 3 weeks later, after draining my savings and terrifying every practical voice in my head, I bought my dream beach house to heal. It wasn't a mansion, not the kind splashed across magazines, but to me it felt like a miracle made of sunlight and salt air. The windows opened to endless blue water, waves whispering instead of traffic screaming. The first evening, I sat barefoot on the wooden deck, watching the horizon melt into gold, feeling something unfamiliar, peace without conditions. That night, just as I began to believe I had escaped the noise of my past, my phone rang. My mother's name lit the screen, and a knot instantly formed in my stomach. I almost ignored it, but guilt is a stubborn habit. I answered. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask how I was. Her voice carried the same authority it always had, the tone that assumed my compliance before I spoke. "We're moving in tomorrow." "Your dad said it's fine." For a second, my mind refused to process the sentence. The words floated there, absurd and heavy. I just froze. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter, as if the ocean itself had retreated. I managed a weak, confused laugh, thinking it had to be a joke, but silence answered me. Then she even added, colder, sharper, "If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else." The audacity of it hit like a physical blow. This was my house, my risk, my fragile attempt at rebuilding a life that had never truly belonged to me. Yet somehow, in her mind, it was already theirs. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. Old emotions rushed back, anger, disbelief, that familiar childhood helplessness. Growing up, my parents had always treated my achievements like communal property. My scholarships were family victories. My salary was family support. My boundaries were inconveniences. Distance had not changed their expectations. It had only delayed them. I could hear my father faintly in the background, not speaking, just existing as silent reinforcement. That hurt more than if he had argued. I should have protested. I should have shouted. Instead, years of conditioning forced politeness into my voice. I asked questions I already knew the answers to. How long? Why? What about my space? My mother brushed everything aside with casual entitlement. Speaking of my home like a vacation, rental they had booked. When the call ended, the house that had felt like sanctuary minutes earlier now felt invaded, contaminated by the weight of their arrival. I paced the living room for hours, rage and panic wrestling inside me. Selling the house was impossible. Letting them take over was unthinkable. Every scenario left me cornered. But beneath the fear, something else began to form. A slow, steady clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped in their house, under their roof, dependent on their approval. This time the ground was mine. The rules were mine. And suddenly the trembling stopped. The anxiety hardened into resolve. If they wanted to claim my peace, they would have to confront a version of me they had never met. By dawn, my shock had transformed into a plan. I replayed my mother's words, "We're moving in tomorrow," over and over, not as a threat, but as a countdown. They expected obedience, accommodation, surrender. They expected the same Brittany who bent, who adjusted, who sacrificed. They had no idea how much I had changed, how much silence had taught me. As sunlight flooded the room, I stood at the window, staring at the waves rolling endlessly forward, unstoppable, unapologetic. My parents believed they were arriving to occupy my home. In reality, they were walking directly into a lesson years in the making. My hands shook, but I smiled. I prepared a surprise for their arrival. Morning arrived wrapped in a deceptive calm, the kind that makes everything look harmless just before something irreversible happens. I woke early, not from anxiety, but from a strange electric focus. The plan I had shaped through the night sat firmly in my mind, clear and immovable. There would be no screaming match, no emotional explosion my parents could twist into proof of my instability. This would be precise, controlled, unforgettable. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, as if preparing a stage. Every object had a purpose now. Every detail mattered. By the time the sun climbed over the water, painting the waves in liquid gold, my beach house no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a courtroom without a judge, a place where truth would finally speak without interruption. My parents arrived exactly as my mother had promised, their SUV rolling into the driveway with the confidence of people who believed they were expected. I watched from the window, heart steady, hands no longer trembling. My mother stepped out first, scanning the property with open satisfaction, already treating it as hers. My father followed, carrying that same passive expression he had worn my entire life. Not cruel, not kind, simply absent when it mattered most. They didn't knock. Of course they didn't. My mother pushed the door open and entered like a victor crossing a finish line. "Brittany, you really should have cleaned the entryway," she called out, her voice echoing through my home. Criticism arriving before affection as always, I greeted them with a calm smile that immediately unsettled her. She expected resistance or forced enthusiasm, not composure. That was the first crack. "Before anything else," I said evenly, "I prepared something for you." Curiosity flickered across her face, quickly replaced by suspicion. My father shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I led them into the living room where 3 thick folders rested neatly on the table. The sight alone changed the air. My mother's expression tightened. Paperwork had never meant anything pleasant in our family unless it benefited them. "What is this?" she demanded. "Receipts," I answered. "Agreements, records, everything connected to the last 10 years of my life." Confusion gave way to irritation. She laughed dismissively, waving a hand. "Oh, please, Brittany, don't start with drama." We just drove for hours, but I didn't react. I simply opened the first folder and slid it toward her. Inside were pages upon pages, bank transfers, loan repayments, utility bills, medical expenses, insurance coverage, even documented conversations, numbers, dates, evidence. The color drained from her face, as understanding slowly replaced arrogance. My father leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Silence spread heavily through the room. I tracked every financial favor. Every time I was told family helps family, I said, my voice steady, almost detached. Every rent payment. Every emergency. Every time my independence was postponed for your comfort. My mother's composure fractured. "Are you seriously trying to bill your parents?" "I'm establishing boundaries," I corrected. "Legally and permanently." Then came the second part of the surprise. I placed a single sheet of paper on top of the folders. A formal document. A short-term rental agreement. Their names already printed. My mother stared at it, disbelief battling fury. "You said you were moving in," I continued. "But this is my house. No one lives here without my terms. If you stay as tenants. Temporary, conditional, respectful." The explosion I had expected finally came. My mother's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. Accusations pouring out, selfish, ungrateful, ridiculous. The familiar arsenal of guilt and outrage. But something extraordinary happened. For the first time, her words had nowhere to land. They no longer controlled anything. The house, the situation, me. My father, usually silent, spoke at last, his voice strained. "Brittany, this is extreme." "No," I replied quietly. "What was extreme was assuming you could take my life whenever it suited you." The confrontation stretched painfully, reality pressing against expectations that refused to collapse gracefully. My mother's anger eventually gave way to something rarer, uncertainty. She looked around the room not with ownership, but with the dawning recognition of exclusion. They had arrived believing authority traveled with them. Instead, they had encountered a closed system they could not dominate. "I love you," I said finally, and the sincerity of it stunned them into silence. But love without respect is just control wearing a kinder mask. That ends here. No shouting followed. No dramatic storming out. Just a heavy, uncomfortable stillness as my parents stood there. stripped of assumptions they had carried for decades. The balance of power had shifted so completely it left no room for argument. They could accept my terms or leave. For once, the choice was entirely theirs, and entirely powerless. When they walked back toward the door, my mother looked smaller, my father older. Not defeated, but confronted by something unfamiliar: consequence. I watched them drive away from the deck where I had once dreamed of peace, the ocean roaring softly behind me like quiet applause. The fear that had defined my life for so long dissolved into something lighter, stronger certainty. Some victories are loud, explosive, cinematic. Mine was silent, precise, and far more devastating. Because the welcome I prepared was not revenge, not cruelty, not rage. It was independence, documented and undeniable.